Now one of those sons, Shem, had a grandson whose name was Abram. And Abram is the man that God decided to bless above all men, to become the one that he would make his descendants like the stars in the universe. He eventually changed his name to Abraham. But one day when God was meeting with Abraham, he said, "Abraham, yes, Lord, I'm going to make you like the stars in the universe. Your descendants will grow and grow. I will bless you, and all people will bless you." Abraham believed what God said, and God counted it as righteousness in him. And he did exactly as God told him and left his land. Now he ended up waiting for the promised child. Because in that promise, God had told Abraham that he and his wife Sarah would have a son. But they kept growing older and older and older. In fact, they grew so old that their bodies were no longer able to have children, and they began to wonder, would God really fulfill his promise of a promised son? So Sarah decided to take things into her own hands. "Abraham, I want you to take my maid, Hagar, and I want you to give me a son." And Abraham did as his wife said. And Hagar did have a son. But it wasn't the son of the promise, because God said, "I will give Abraham and Sarah a son." The promised child was to come through them, not from Abraham and Hagar. And they waited, and they waited. And then one day, God had Abraham and Sarah have a seed born inside them that grew into a baby that became a child that was born. And his name was Isaac. They named him Isaac because Isaac means laughter. And she laughed that God had finally blessed her womb with a child. Now Isaac grew and grew, and he became a man. And as he became a man, he had sons, because they were obeying God's command to be fruitful and multiply. Now he had two sons that were twins, Esau and Jacob. And they could not be more different if you wanted two people to be more different. One was red and broody and wild and an outdoorsy man. That was Esau. And Jacob was more refined and scholarly and a thinker. Now, as they grew up, you would think that Esau would be the child of the promise, being the firstborn. But that was not the case. The promised child was Jacob. Jacob was known as the man who wrestled with the angel of the Lord, and he overcame. He wrestled all night with the angel of the Lord at the Jabbok River, and he would not let go until God blessed him. And sure enough, before the night was over, God blessed him and gave him a new name, Israel. Israel was his name because he was renamed because he wrestled with God, and he had wrestled with man, and he had overcome. Now Israel also had sons because they were fulfilling the promise of be fruitful and multiply. And his first wife, Leah, she had 10. And his second wife, Rachel, she had 2. 12 sons in all he had through these 2 wives. Now Joseph was so special in his father's eyes that the other brothers, when they went to him, they grew jealous. They didn't like how the father loved him more. And one day when Joseph went out to the fields to send a message from the father, the brothers decided, we're going to sell him off in a caravan. We will sell him away and get rid of him. And they did. They sent him off in a caravan to Egypt and went home and told Dad that he was killed by a wild beast. But what man intends for evil, God will use for good. And as he went into Egypt as a slave, God's hand was upon him, because God will fulfill his promises. And even though he was in bondage in Egypt, God granted him favor with Pharaoh's court. And as the favor came upon him more and more and more in the court, he ended up becoming the second-hand man to Pharaoh. A famine came over the land, and it happened to be that his brothers showed up and didn't even recognize him because he was so dressed up like an Egyptian, they didn't even know it was their brother. And he saw that it was in his family, and it grieved him. When the family came back a second time, he finally revealed himself to them. I am your brother. It is okay. I forgive you. What you intended for bad, God used for good. He has me here so I can help you. Go and get our father. Bring him back, and I will take care of you. You will be fed, and you will not starve in this family. And so the brothers went, and they got the father. They brought him back, and they came, and this is how the nation of Israel began to live in the land of Goshen.